Hi there, I'm Mike Talks. You might know me from Twitter as TestSheepNZ, from my blogs as well. And I'm going to try and convince you by the end of this session that a tester's job belongs in production. Now, typically when we think about the tester's role is quite well, it comes after development and before something gets released into production. We typically test things, we improve things, and at the end somebody wants us to produce a test exit report that proves, yeah, this is looking pretty good, and then we kind of like say see ya and we're off. And then we come back maybe about a month later and say, hey, did it go to production okay? But we usually our relationship with the release pretty much ends with the test exit report. Now, a couple of months ago, I worked on contract for a really interesting company. That first week they said, yes, well, at the end of every story, we release to production. I went, well, that's good. That's really great agile principles there. And they said, yeah. And you as the tester, you'll be the one that's putting it into production. And I was like, oh, that's a little scary. Because of course I'd heard lots of horror stories about how challenging releases could get. Um, and yeah, very nervously going through the instructions. Within a week, I had actually done my first release into production. And it was a great learning experience. It was absolutely phenomenal. I've been in the industry for about almost 25 years at this point, but to get my hands on actually pushing something into production, that was unusual. But then once I'd gone through the experience a few times, I realized it wasn't quite as unusual as you thought. So why testers? Well, obviously one of the reasons why I'd heard so many horror stories about releases going wrong is typically releasing was a very manual process, and you'd have a whole list of instructions and you'd follow one, two, three, four, five. And typically what could happen is on production, sometimes it would be happening at unsociable hours, and two instructions would get mixed up, or somebody would forget to do one instruction. But a common part of some of the release pipelines for places where they're releasing really frequently, not just every week, but several times a week, is the fact that they've decided that the release pipeline needs to be automated, because you can't afford for somebody on the day to get two instructions mixed up. So, as much as possible, it should be a script that follows a process, and it should almost be push a button and it all goes through. So once it's been automated to that level, it feels like almost anyone could handle it. So again, why testers? Well, for most places, before you go to production, you want to push something into a staging area. And in that staging area, you'd want to know whether the latest build with all the merges has gone well or badly. And who best to do that than a tester? It seems, we've gone through a few years of kind of having people like dismissing our skills a little bit, but testers are excellent troubleshooters. That's why we do so well in testing in a test environment. Some people would say that's why we cause such havoc in a testing environment. But in a staging environment, that's like really what you want to do. You want to know if there's problems. So, uh, so typically, on the morning of a release, it would be, yeah, I'd find the latest build with my changes in, and I would merge it with the latest production code, and then push it to staging, and that would go successfully. And then it would be like, okay, let's see what we've got in staging. So first of all, I would kick off some automated tests, which would take about 15 minutes to run. But while that's happening, of course, I'm going in and I'm logging in using some appropriate accounts, and I'm going, okay, here's my change. I'm going to test a few things around that change to see if my change is in the merge and it's all behaving as I'd expect it to be. And sometimes that would take a little bit of digging around. And sometimes some of the tests would fail. And again, would have to dig around the whys and try and do that manually to see if it was a failure in the automation or if it was an actual problem. And being a tester, of course, making those judgment calls, that was something we do really well. When that went well, it would be, well, if it didn't go well, we'd go, actually, well, I'm not sure about this build. Maybe we'll pull this change and we'll look at it, and then we'll think about doing a release tomorrow. No big deal. But if it looked good, and most times it did, onto production. So again, automated scheduler would push the change into production. All I'd need to do is not mess up the build ID. That was the one point of failure, and thankfully I never got that one wrong. And yes, it would go onward into production. And again, once in production, it was a case of doing some quick smoke tests again to make sure that my change was in there, and then more importantly, looking at the exception logs to see if, now that we've released this, is anything going wrong now it's in production? Are there any red flags? And again, being a tester is an ideal person to go there. We're used to seeing problem areas, looking for things, and kind of within about 20 minutes of it being in production, we'd kind of go, okay, that looks good, and wrap it all up. So, before 2021, I never really considered as much how much our testing and troubleshooting skills were so valuable in helping to get something into production. And now I've experienced that. It's something that I would challenge you all, are your testers helping out in production? Because it's a great place to add value. I'm Mike Talks. I hope you enjoyed that little story and hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.